Now, on to our amazing panel of outdoor industry leaders discussing lessons they've learned to how to stay ahead of market shifts and their experiences building company cultures that attract and retain talent in today's dynamic market. Please welcome to the PubTalk stage John Evons, former President Keen, Russ Hopcus, former President prAna, and Ellen Sheedy, head of legal, America's On. And our moderator is going to be John Evans. So put your hands together for these three.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. These
Good
are on?
evening.
We're good.
Okay.
We're
Can you all hear us? Okay,
Yeah.
good. Well, thanks so much for being here, everyone. We're really excited to get started with this panel. My name is Ellen Sheedy, and we have Russ Hopcus and John Evans. We all are outdoor industry people. I started my career at Perkins Coie and worked with emerging companies there, did public company securities work, as well as mergers and acquisitions. Then spent 9 years at Keen in the legal department, working across the business, everything from IP to contracts, employment law matters, marketing, ESG. And then I recently joined the legal team at On. And I moved to Central Oregon in 2020, probably for a lot of the same reasons that brought all of you here. Love the outdoors, love mountain biking, trail running, cross-country skiing, and it's a great place to have a family. And now Russ and John will each introduce themselves a little bit, and then John's prepared some background info and context on the last several years in the outdoor industry. Then we have some questions. And we'd love to have some audience participation. So as we talk, please feel free to jump in at any point, ask us questions. We want to talk about what you want to hear about. Take it
Awesome.
away,
Yeah,
Russ.
great. Yeah, no such thing as interruptions. So just talk whenever you just raise your hand or just blurt it out. That's fine. As Ellen said, I'm Russ Hopcus. I've been in this industry for the outdoor and athletic industry for honestly almost my entire life, probably 40 years, I guess, something like that. I guess my biggest career accomplishment was being able to navigate Portland through Nike, Adidas, Columbia, Keen, and then most recently I've run a brand called prAna, if you know prAna Apparel, based out of Southern California. So I was the president there for 4 years. And then like Ellen and others, it was kind of a planned accident. We loved Ben. We lived in Portland for a number of years, always came down here, and we had a house here. And like COVID babies, I was a COVID transplant. So we hightailed, packed up our truck and headed up to our house and decided after about a year, somebody needed to go back down and run the business, and it wasn't going to be me. So I wanted to stay here. So I've quote unquote, I hate to even use the word retired, but I kind of retired. And I've spent my time now advising and consulting with companies that are either in the outdoor industry or adjacent to. And adjacency would be Uni Pizza Ovens. I've got to pitch Uni Pizza. Anybody has an Uni Pizza Oven? I'm doing some work with them right now. So anyways, I'm excited to be here. First time I've been at this event, and super excited to impart whatever knowledge or at least be able to learn from you all as well. So thanks.
Awesome. Well, good evening, everybody. It's great to be here with you all. As Russ and Ellen have said, we're members of the outdoor industry. We've kind of grown up in certain ways in different parts of it. For me, it's an interesting time in my life. I have a 2.5-year-old and a 9-month-old, and so, my time in Central Oregon has been kind of round two for me. Actually, I came here when I was a 5-year-old. My parents brought me up from Southern California, and I lived here until I was about 12, and then I moved to a city that seemed very familiar in name, but very different in context. It was called South Bend, Indiana, and anybody that tries to convince you that South Bend and Bend are the same, I'll be happy to vouch for you that they're a liar. So a lot of great things about South Bend, but very happy to be back for my second stint in Bend. We came here in 2021 and have been very happy to be back. Most recently, I was president of Keen. I left Keen in September, but was with them for about 9 years and really enjoyed my time in the outdoor industry. And my background actually is in the technology and software space. So footwear, you may ask, as we continue this conversation, seems a bit odd to find your way into and ultimately run a footwear company, but it all made sense in some weird way as time went on. So anyway, we're so pleased to be with you tonight, and I'm going to start with a little bit of a trip down memory lane. It might not be, for everybody the most positive memory, but it feels like going back to 2020 and starting there is really important to get some context about what the outdoor and even activewear industries like Russ has been through at prAna have lived through in the last 3 years, and kind of where are we today and where are we going, more importantly. So if we kind of reorient ourselves back to 2020, we, let's say we're in March of 2020. We all were instructed we had to stay home, right? Life was completely flipped on its head, and that shelter-in-place order basically changed everything about our lives, from where we worked and how we worked to just, how we just went about living in society across the world, right? And so I think it's important context because what happened at that time was a complete shift in the way in which people experienced, the outdoors, right? It was what ultimately became a tailwind for the outdoor industry. At first, very much felt like it was a complete an utter disaster that we had to navigate through. We just were frankly worried about how to keep our employees safe, how to keep our own families safe. And for most outdoor companies, especially in the outdoor footwear industry and apparel industries, there was a lot of conservatism at that point in time, as you can all imagine, right? People were worried about what the outlook might be for their businesses and just how we were going to take care of one another. So what happened was many of those branded manufacturers significantly pulled back their expectations for the 2020 calendar year. And they cut their orders with factories. They told their retailers we're not going to be in stock. They expected the worst to happen. And what ultimately that happened next was quite surprising. Maybe in hindsight it shouldn't have been, but people found the outdoors as a sanctuary. It became the place where we could all get together and get to know our neighbors again, get to know our families in a deeper way. I know for me personally, the outdoors was a connection and a way of connecting with people that I just didn't have in my daily life that I was really missing. And so, I think at that moment in time, brands started to realize, wait a second, this is actually something that we should look at as an advantage, right? We got to find the silver lining in difficult times. And they said, wait a second, we shouldn't cut all of those factory orders anymore. We need to add more orders to our factories because people are excited to be outside walking again, hiking again, getting on bikes and being out in the world because that's the safe thing to be able to do. Well, what happened in the background is the supply chain went through a complete upheaval, right? The bullwhip effect, for those of you who live in the supply chain world, was in classic form, right? Orders were cut, demand was down, surging expectations for new orders started to occur, and they just couldn't keep up with demand, right? You started to see in the news that people were paying over $20,000 a container to ship goods from Asia to the United States. In normal times, that's $1,500, maybe $2,000 at most. And so there was just huge swings in how the supply chain was correcting itself, trying to figure out how to approach that. And the reality was that most of these manufacturers were going through their own challenges. They were in countries where there were stay-at-home orders being mandated to them as well. So as fast as they were getting orders, they were being told, you can't show up, you can't produce, you can't ship. And it just exacerbated what became a very difficult challenge for companies to be able to bring inventory in and satisfy the demand for people to get outdoors again. If you put yourself in the customer's point of view, right? They're saying to themselves, okay, well, I used to go out and spend money at restaurants and go on trips and be able to go to events, go to Hayden Amphitheater and enjoy music, and it just wasn't possible. And so there was this huge concentration of spending that started to happen through e-commerce and through digital channels, very focused on things that were safe and possible for people to do. And so that, along with this kind of demand for just being in a safe space outdoors, really fueled a massive growth perspective for this industry and for many industries as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about, what happened after that and, what companies are learning from this experience. But you can imagine that as that situation started to normalize, you also started to have the reversing effect of that, right? Companies started to build their forecasts on these over-exuberant expectations that growth was going to continue. You had the government giving free stimulus to people to buy stuff. People weren't spending money on things that they normally did before. So this over-concentration of spending was happening in certain spaces, and it wasn't something that was going to last forever. So as that started to unwind, right, we got through the third wave of the pandemic, we started to see that people were able to get back out in the world again, people started to travel, they started to experience life again. Well, their demand for things started to change. Services, entertainment, enjoyment, they started to expand. And so I think the outdoor industry went through this massive growth spurt and then this recognition, and not every company, but this great recognition that, okay, there's a normalization that has to occur on the other side of this. And so you started to see a similar supply chain challenge start to occur. This kind of forecasting toward growth forever turned into there's a reality check here. We have to be planning for a return back to some semblance of normalcy again. And so in 2022, as we started to see the combination of geopolitical challenges with the Ukraine war, the end of stimulus programs occurring, the opening up of people being able to get back out in the world again, and this kind of returning back to some semblance of normal, we started to realize that, okay, maybe those expectations were very over accommodative for a different environment. So, you had that coupled with inflation, right? We started to see prices going up across the board. We started to see that life was just getting more expensive because of these supply chain challenges, increased prices, et cetera.
It is going to get better, right?
It is going to get better. I'm having a hard time just living in the darkness.
PTSD here.
Yeah. So we get through that, right? And what happens? Well, all those orders still exist in factories. People are still producing those goods, and we end up in a different problem on the supply chain side, an over-inventory situation, right? We start seeing flooding of inventory into the marketplace. We start seeing that liquidations become a big part of the strategy, right? The 2022 era was a challenging one for a lot of brands to kind of navigate through. And we get finally to 2023, as Russ is asking us to finally get to, which is, where are we and how do we get to, some semblance of normal again? And so I think what's most important is what did we learn from it, right? We went through these massive roller coasters over the last 3 years, and it brings us to this, January night in 2026, where luckily it's not as cold as it was a week ago, where we can actually use hindsight in a way that we haven't been able to for over 100 years and say a pandemic was right behind us, but what did we learn from it? What good things came from it, and what do we take from our businesses that can actually go forward? So tonight's conversation is going to be using that as a setup for what happened. Where do we go from here? What did we learn, and how do we actually set a path forward? Okay? So I'm going to ask the first question.
Have any ideas?
I'm going to call on random people in the audience, so I'm looking forward to all of your suggestions. And we're all in this together, right? Every industry, every person went through this. And, if we're lucky enough to be in this room tonight, yeah, please, go ahead.
So where do you think you're taking your manufacturing? Are you pulling it back into the States? Are you staying in this continent? Mexico? Where do you find your industry taking its name?
Yeah.
And for the people out in the hall, this is a question about manufacturing, so
Yeah.
I'll let you take it.
It's a great point. You want to start?
I'll start
Yeah,
a little
go
bit,
for it.
but and footwear and apparel are going to be different based on different sourcing strategies in different countries that specialize in each of those. But I would say that a couple of things happened during that time. We in apparel were moving out of China, moving our outerwear into Vietnam, moving our wovens and knits into Sri Lanka, and also into India. We have a good manufacturing base there. But as I was leaving, we were actually looking at nearshoring, and Mexico was one of those markets that we were really looking at taking advantage of. And they're investing a lot in manufacturing. They've been manufacturing product for quite some time, footwear especially, and I think Keen is pretty well embedded, I believe, in Mexico. But even in apparel, we're seeing that the nearshoring, just to try to offset a lot of these shipping challenges, because there's shipping challenges today. I mean, anybody who's taking anything through the strait is really challenged right now, not knowing if their ship's going to make it through, and insurance costs are going up. So it's not getting quite as costly as the $25,000 or $20,000 a container, but it is getting up there. So trying to get it as close to possible to the U.S. borders. I think the U.S. manufacturer is interesting, and actually I think between Ellen and John, they could probably answer that more, because Keen does quite a bit of manufacturing in the U.S., specifically in Portland. But I think for apparel, it's a bit of a challenge for the reasons that we know from a cost standpoint.
Yeah, I'll just add one more point to that. You know, the idea of moving manufacturing back to the U.S. as a, you know, let's just talk footwear for a second. There's 24 billion pairs of shoes made every year. There's 8 billion people on this planet. We got a problem, first of all, with the number of shoes that we're making in this world that are disposable and going through on an annual basis. But the reality is that to produce 24 billion pairs of shoes, you can't just all of a sudden pick up that manufacturing footprint and relocate it into a different location. It's just not possible. So as fast as Vietnam, as fast as Mexico, as fast as India are trying to quickly, and Bangladesh as well, trying to become the new manufacturing powerhouses in lieu of China's, you know, gap that they've really, frankly, lost a lot of, you know, favor in. I think it's a process, and it's something that we all have to be working toward consciously. We're going to talk a little bit tonight about, you know, how has the consumer and this industry also taken progressive steps to really push the agenda around sustainability, around responsible manufacturing, around detoxification of the supply chain. And part of that is about your manufacturing footprint. A big part of that is about your manufacturing footprint. But it is a big challenge that will take us generations to solve. It doesn't get solved overnight. Yeah?
We're talking about she wants to know about the ethical side of how these goods are being produced. Is that the focus?
Yeah, I mean, I'll add on, and then Ellen, please feel free to add to it. So, you know, a code of conduct and an ethics foundation is core to building a responsible manufacturing footprint, right? There are many companies today that produce part of that 24 billion pairs of footwear that don't care about a code of conduct and a detoxification strategy. You know, I'm proud to have worked for a company where ridding the forever chemicals, PFAS, for example, was a priority years before it became mainstream to even talk about it. But the reality is that we still produce 24 billion pairs of shoes every day. So, you know, I think the reality about the manufacturing challenges that any extractive and or, you know, kind of, you know, virgin industry faces is how to deal with that in a way that is making progress toward some new vision for what it means to be responsible and to operate in this way. And I think there are many companies and retailers and countries as well who are setting very clear mandates about what it means to be progressive and an ally in that space.
Yeah, I think this is an area that's rapidly evolving. Obviously, there's many more laws and regulations. California, the EU is really ahead of the game. And there's lots of companies that really care, and everyone's on a journey. Everyone's trying to do the best they can, figuring out how to get there. And I see, you know, more and more evidence in my job that consumers care. Consumers are asking questions about it. they want to know, and it's really important for companies to, walk the talk and be transparent and do what they say that they're doing, and make valiant efforts towards manufacturing in a clean and more ethical way.
If I can add to that, because prAna was our key initiative was around sustainability, and just the term sustainability itself is a term that could be interpreted in many different ways, and I think we had 14 or 15 different sustainability attributes that we applied against each of our products, and our goal was to have every one of our products have at least one of those attributes, which we were able to do. But then we started focusing also on just worker welfare, and prAna was the first brand, first company in apparel to actually go down the fair trade route, and our goal was to have 100% of our product made at fair trade factories, which really, it's if you know fair trade, it's not so much on the sustainability side, but it really is on worker welfare. And the manufacturing agents, or not agents, but the manufacturers themselves, actually pitch in, and we create funds for the workers to use for their own betterment of their communities. And it's really quite an impressive program that they've been able to pioneer. Now other apparel companies are jumping down going down that road as well. So it's pretty all-encompassing, and to Ellen's point, it really is a journey. It just isn't apparel manufacturing. Manufacturing in general just isn't a clean business. So there's nothing that's 100% clean. Some people like wearing organic cotton, and that's not really that clean. Cotton in general is not clean. It's not a clean business. I'm sure a lot of you know that. So you just try to do better. And I think John brought up a point also just in terms of consumption itself, and I think Patagonia's done a nice job in getting that word out there that you really don't have to buy a lot of product. You can repair, you can replace, you can resell, you can take your product to Rugged Thread, which I've done here in town, to repair. I mean, there's different avenues to do to go down to actually take care of your own products. We could probably have hours on sustainability and manufacturing. I do want to go back, though, John's initial point on the as I was getting PTSD on those last few years of COVID. One of the things that we've talked about is no matter the climate, no matter the business climate, there are always brands that find their way to the top. There are brands that find their way to continue to grow, to continue to take share. And in our industry, not because Ellen's here, but On Running is one of those brands that has really blossomed through COVID and continues to blossom. Although she said she can't say anything because they're publicly traded, so we can't say anything about them tonight. But they continue to do really well. Hoka has done really well. But Hoka has On has a brand. They've got an aesthetic that's completely different, and I feel somewhat revolutionary, at least evolutionary within the industry. Hoka has a cushioning technology that has really changed the running industry. They've done a great job with that. Viore, it's a really amazing brand that we used to compete against in Southern California that kicked our butts, that just found a way to really, well, they got a huge investment, but they found a way to really to promote their brand and promote a Southern California lifestyle and produce actually really beautiful product. Brooks Running, it's been in the business for a long time, and to be clear, I'm somewhat biased. My daughter works for Brooks, but they've been able to do a really great job by focusing on running and continuing to grow, certainly during COVID when it was a little bit easier, even notwithstanding the supply chain challenges, and even post-COVID. Those brands have done a really nice job by creating differentiation, focus on their core consumer. In the case of Brooks, focusing on their wholesale distribution and really giving a damn about their wholesale distribution. So they're putting things in place to really continue to drive their business and elevate their brand. So it is possible. It's hard to say there's one specific thing for every brand to do because every brand's in a different place in a different industry. One of the brands I work with, I mentioned Uni. They were one of those, like many of these companies, just hockey stick growth during 2 years, trying to find their footing, but still growing, creating a new category. That was their thing. They've created a category that didn't exist. Continue to leverage that. So it really depends. It sounds like within the horse world, you all, same thing, right? You're creating a new category that's creating energy that nobody else has thought of, that nobody else really gave it that, that energy around it. So there are opportunities to find the right space to take advantage of that and grow.
Yeah, another question back here.
To that point, out of curiosity, I mean, as part of your marketing budgets for both your companies and prAna, what kind of ROI analysis was done on the value of selling your environmental consciousness or your fair trade work relationship?
What kind of efforts did you use in your marketing budgets to look at the ROI that would come from telling the story of being a sustainable brand?
It's a great question. You know, I wish I could tell you we were as sophisticated as you're asking me to be in order to tell you how successful the ROI was. But I think it's because it wasn't a marketing play, right? For example, Keen many years ago decided they were going to create a group called the Keen Effect. And the Keen Effect wasn't a marketing vehicle. It was a group within the company that cared deeply about the values that Keen wanted to, kind of emanate into the marketplace. It was actually a term that we didn't even come up with. It was actually kind of bestowed to us from the Conservation Alliance, who actually said that the impact that Keen made when they joined the Conservation Alliance was a multiplier effect, and they called it the Keen Effect. And so we ran with that. We said, you know what? The Keen Effect is actually something that needs to be its own entity. It needs to have its own organization within the company who is advocating for a few different things. It advocates for how we tell stories into the marketplace about what we're doing. It advocates for the detoxification and focus on responsible manufacturing. It focuses on cleaning up our kind of impact in communities and really building, deepening relationships in the places in which Keen did business. And so, we use the Keen Effect actually as the vehicle I'll tell you, the reason why most people came to Keen and stayed at Keen for as long as they did, including myself, was because of the Keen Effect. And it is an energy source within the company that also became a tool that we could use to tell stories that became part of our marketing arsenal, if you will, to be able to communicate that externally into the marketplace. But so much of what our social responsibility and kind of sustainability efforts centered around with the Keen Effect was not because it was going to become amplified to some marketing message. It was because it was truly in alignment with what we believed as a company. So I think I do believe that marketing needs to prove itself, right? There's a fixed amount that you're going to invest in marketing every year, but the best marketing tells the story for you because people are word-of-mouth evangelists of your brand, and they just tell their friends that they experienced, a road trip that Keen went on with a yellow bus around the country to save public lands, and then they became lifelong evangelists of the brand, right? So I think it's about flipping the mindset a little bit to say it's not about this direct outcome you're trying to get. It's about how do you take the values that you believe so intrinsically to who you are as a company and as a brand and find the most authentic way to let that kind of emanate throughout the way in which you do business. Yeah.
First of all, thank you for that answer. As leaders, delivering the right product, right place, right time, right amount, right price, aligned to consumers' insights, where do you see AI?
Okay. And then the night took a turn. So he's like, 3 holograms. So this is a question. You've got the right product at the right place, the right time, and then where do you see AI coming in to influence that?
You want me to start? No, you go ahead, Ellen.
None of us, I don't know if any of us are experts on AI. I'm definitely not an expert in AI, but from what I read, and folks I've talked to, I think around inventory management is, I think, the first place that people are going to go to. To John's point earlier, just people trying to find what the right level is today is extremely difficult. And I think that's going to be the unlock for AI in the industry. I think once you start pulling away or using it to attach to a consumer and that consumer experience, I'm afraid of that. I don't know enough about it, but it frightens me that you start losing the authenticity. So I see it in the background, helping manage the business. I think that could be of use.
Yeah, I think there's amazing potential for AI. I see it in the the legal arena a lot. It's great for research, for first drafts of things. I think I see designers using it for better or for worse. I'm not sure yet, but that's certainly happening. I can see it being used in the marketing space for kind of in this somewhat similar ways to legal as kind of like a first cut at something, seeing what else is out there, what can some whatever tool you use pull together, and then I think it absolutely needs a human touch in whatever sphere it's in.
I heard resume writing is a really big deal too. So.
I'll just add one more point. I use a combination of AI tools on a daily basis. I use ChatGPT, I use Midjourney, I use Rewind.ai for every meeting I sit in, and it's transformed the way I work, to be honest with you. I think anybody that's not paying attention and looking at it as a way of working differently, and frankly more smartly, is missing the plot behind what AI is. It's not here to steal your job, it's here to make you better at doing your job. So I find, for example, I used ChatGPT when I was president of Keen. I would ask questions of ChatGPT on problems that I was facing, and I would love to see the way in which it would come back with thoughts about certain things that I would do. It would be like having your own personal assistant or your own personal chief of staff to be able to bounce ideas off of and be able to use that as a way of informing your final thoughts. Now, for those that use it as a way to form your final thoughts, well, that's probably because you don't have enough domain expertise to be able to actually have a perspective on it. But, you know, hell, it's part of getting there, right? And so I think AI is going to be a way for smart people to find shortcuts to be able to become far more domain experts in many different broad topics, in the same way in which, you know, I started my career in consulting, and it basically was a machine gun of different environments and different experiences, in the same way that AI can bring that same lessons to the table. Something like Rewind.ai, I would tell anybody in this room to download. It can sit there, transcribe your notes in your meetings, help you go back in time, look at the conversations you were having, and it's super valuable when you're trying to context switch on a daily basis. Yeah, we can keep going.
In the back. Let's forget about AI for a minute. Have you considered the possibilities with blockchain internally? Okay, now we're taking another turn.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's start with Starbucks, right? I mean, if you look at how Starbucks has built their loyalty program, which has now moved into Odyssey and become, the de facto model for how to build a brand in kind of the NFT and blockchain space, I think there's a lot to be learned from it. Nike is chasing that pathway right now, and they're doing incredible things in that same space. I think I think most great technologies go through a great start-stop type of environment and a roller coaster until they get to some sort of mass market adoption, right? And so blockchain technology has so many different, a myriad of different ways in which it can be explored and utilized within companies, from supply chain, open ledger technologies to, NFT minting and ways in which brands can create unique experiences for very targeted audiences that want to engage much more deeply. So I think we should all expect that blockchain is going to be a technology that brands will embrace, and the best brands are already putting significant investments into that space.
Yes.
First, John, thank you for mentioning Conservation Alliance.
Thank you for mentioning Conservation Alliance.
And, protecting wild places, Connor, and I would love to talk to you about membership. But my question is,
It's a great organization.
my question is, prAna started as a direct-to-consumer brand, had some direct-to-consumer internet business in stores. All three of your brands sell direct-to-consumer and sell wholesale. What's the percentage that should be?
So this is.
Consumer and wholesale.
So he wants to know what's kind of the sweet spot for balancing direct to consumer and wholesale.
I think it's a great question. I think there are a lot of companies that are trying to figure it out. So those direct-to-consumer brands today that are venturing into wholesale, like an Allbirds is a really good example of decent-sized direct-to-consumer business that realize that, wow, we need storefronts to help us out. I don't know what the right mix. I think it really depends on the company itself, Joe, but we were roughly around 45 direct-to-consumer, and 55 wholesale at the end. And that felt like a really good mix. We felt like we really needed retailers to be able to actually tell our brand story, to get our brand out there. It was actually a great communication tool for us. We needed the feedback from our retailers, so it really helped us in many ways. By the same token, on our direct-to-consumer business, which at the time was 7 stores and online, and our e-com business by far dwarfed the 7 stores, And we learned a lot from our consumers through e-com as well, and it's just a really good, healthy balance. There's no place you can tell your brand story at wholesale other than your own doors or your own site. A retailer will never give you the square footage. You'll never be profitable enough, and you've really got to be very careful. At the same time, I believe brands need wholesale, the right wholesale dealers that can at least partially tell your story in an authentic way. So I think the percentage is really difficult to get to. Every brand's going to be a little bit different, but I think it's a good, healthy blend of both. I think they need each other, especially now. We've seen as people started coming back and shopping in stores, it's become a necessity for these brands that they're starting to wake up and realize it.
I'll add to it. I'm the guy that started his career in the e-commerce space, and so naturally you would assume I would be telling you 100% direct to consumer. I think the reality is I've evolved my own thinking as time has gone on as well. And I kind of think of it in three major buckets. I think of it as the kind of e-commerce and retail channel that you own outright, the wholesale channel that you partner and work with your wholesale vendors, and then this gray area called the marketplaces channel that is frankly taking over the world. And all three of them are incredibly important for you to orchestrate in a way that makes your customer, or at Keen we call them the fan, feel like you care about them equally no matter which one they decide to do business in. And so what that right mix is between DTC versus wholesale versus marketplaces is really about how do you create the most exceptional experience and tear down your internal silos within your company that are frankly creating operational challenges to deliver a consistent experience, and creating a consumer-facing experience that is consistent and allows them to choose where they want to engage with your brand no matter where it is. So I actually, I'll be honest with you, as Keen's business continued to evolve, we actually, as the pandemic started to wane, we pulled down some of our expectations about what we expected our own DTC channels to contribute because it was unhealthy for the brand and unhealthy for the fan experience as we went forward. So, I think that's the privilege of a private company. That's the privilege of public companies haven't been able to really tell that same story. But we did that because we believe we would deliver the most exceptional fan experience if we removed artificial incentives that would be driving us to take behaviors that would be out of alignment with their needs. So I think that's the way to frame the new mindset.
I do think if you think about over the time that John and I were both at Keen, the business changed so much and that mix changed so much, and that's probably the answer is it will continuously evolve. It won't be static, and there'll be times like the pandemic where you lean more heavily into e-com or the marketplace channels, and then other moments like now where it seems really important to lean into retail and even into marketing that's outside of the digital channel.
Yes.
Where is the industry in designing for men versus designing for women?
I love this question.
I say versus because as a consumer who's female, it feels like kind of a battle. I get it as a fashion industry, it's one animal. But in the outdoor industry, we're designing for practicality and safety first, and then for fashion second. That's my take on it. But it took me 3 years to find this jacket as a female. Every brand had a male yellow jacket. I'm a voracious pedestrian, and I worked in search and rescue for a while. I wanted something like this. It took me 3 years to find a female jacket that was this color, even though on the male side of every brand out there had it orange and yellow and red and everything else. And so it's still, I see a lot of brands breaking out or little companies breaking out with female specific gear related because of that frustration and that friction in the market. And I'm wondering if you're seeing it and recognize it in your level and how you're addressing it.
So this is a question about designing for female versus male in the outdoor industry. What's the status of that? How is that evolving?
Yeah, I can start, or do you want to start?
Go ahead.
Okay. I think, look, the outdoor industry has been a white guy's industry for far too long, right? I mean, it just has been. And access and inclusion is a topic that is percolating across every outdoor company. And it, frankly, hasn't gotten as much traction, frankly, as it needs to in order to get to where it needs to go. I think the outdoor industry is more aware of the challenges about the lack of inclusivity because the population is changing around them, right? We see this constant evolution of the census telling us that we need to wake up and recognize that the population doesn't look like it did 100 years ago, and yet some industries are still, frankly, operating in a mindset that was approachable 50 to 100 years ago. So I think we saw in the last 3 years a massive recognition of that, a waking up, if you will, in many ways to not only product design and development needs that are necessary here, fit needs. We started, Keen was a good example of a company who decided to create, we called it genderful fits, to allow for every product to be sold and be very approachable, whether it was a men's and women's sizing. But color is another example of an area where there is gender bias that gets baked into every color design decision that happens. And so I think the industry is far more aware of the problem, far more conscious of the problem than it ever has been. There are great advocacy groups that are making this very visible through data and through ways in which we can use this to make more informed decisions. But we still got a long way to go. This is still an industry that is, gendered, is highly, still a lacking of access and inclusivity that it needs to get to.
And I will say that all the big outdoor companies want the female consumer. I mean,
No question.
the amount of times that I've heard lead with her, and everyone wants to try to get there. It's just taking a while.
Yeah, I can say from the apparel standpoint and specific to prAna, I mean, all of our women's product were built on women's blocks. We focused a lot on women's sizing and different color palettes, and men's was, of course, different sizing and color palettes as well. So I thought we were doing actually a fairly decent job on fit. We had some certain issues with certain products, but for the most part, if you just split it in gender profiles, I felt we did a decent job. But the pressure became toward the end, and might still be going on, I really don't know, but we started getting actually pressure for more gender neutral product, and for people that didn't want to identify as male or identify as female to have a product that stood for themselves, for them. So that was a conversation that we were beginning to have. And on top of that, and I'll plug for a board that I sit on for Camber, which is Camber Outdoors, which is we're focused on creating greater diversity, equity, inclusion in the outdoor industry, focused on the workplace. But within in the construct of DEI, to John's point, it's a bunch of white men or white women that are designing it. So the experiences that we're all drawing from, or that the design teams are drawing from, are really their own experiences. So there's a real need to expand that design world to bring in different influences from other cultures, other experiences, to design more relevant product and a variety of that relevant product. So it's an interesting, complex, probably evolutionary time right now with respect to product design, aside from fit. Hopefully fit, the industry is getting down fairly well, I hope. Now, whether they find the right color, it might be a little bit different.
I have a question about fit because I don't know that what we're using, this like standard sizing is actually really working. Like one size is a little snug in the tummy and one size is a little too big in the shoulders. What about building sizing on frame size and then body type? Is anyone talking about this? Yeah. Same number of SKUs.
Yeah, we used blocks that were based off body types that we would build products. Now, the complexity comes in when you're using different fabrication, different stitches. As a designer, it becomes a little bit more trickier to make sure you're managing that and managing the tolerances in each of those products. So it does become a little bit more challenging based on the fabric that you're using. And we've all purchased probably some of the product that I'm wearing now. I can buy the same pair of pants from Huckberry and in the same size, and they're going to be a little off based on that day, that manufacturer, and the tolerances that are in that particular product.
Right, which is a bummer. Yeah.
I think there are some good examples, though. Outdoor Research, is a good example of a brand that, came out with an extended sizing range, especially for women, designed by women, and I think it's a good example of progress that's happening. I think REI has been a retailer that's really been one of the more progressive in terms of pushing their brands to start to think more broadly and expand their mindset about what they expect going into selling into them as a retailer. And so I think the industry is absolutely in this kind of transition, but it will take time to, to truly embrace what it means to kind of represent the population as it looks today, and it just doesn't yet.
Yes, yellow jacket.
How do you see brands reconciling the fact that they need to grow their brand, but at the same point, the more volume, the more SKUs, the more sort of product they're putting out there, that they're contributing to, whether they're a key or whether it's someone who's dealing with issues on supply chain, the fact that they're still just making more product to your 24 billion shoes, you just scale that across all different kinds of categories, and now you have the Chilean experience where you see a sea of clothing that's basically, as far as you can see, that's getting burned. We're shipping it there. All the big nations are shipping their dead product there, product liabilities, fabric liabilities. How are brands reconciling that fact that they need to grow, but they still, at the same point, have to be responsible? And is there sort of a new kind of point of view on that since COVID, since we were all locked down, since now we're all having
So we're.
looking at our inputs and understanding how impactful our lives are at 9 billion?
This is a complex question. I love this. Thank you. So, how are we reconciling growing a brand and being really conscious about what we're putting out there and the gross waste that's happening? And so, what's the conversation evolving for you all?
Want me to start, or do you want to start?
I'll start. I think all brands are grappling with this, right? Or all brands that are thinking and trying to do the right thing are grappling with this. I think they're many different approaches to handling it, whether it's thinking about recycling or take back or circularity programs, whether it's, in the case of Keen, there's a real emphasis on durability and building something that'll last for a long time. I don't think anyone has, as far as I know, no one has really solved the problem or found the solution, but it's some sort of combination of what do we do with this material at the end of its life, or how do we make these things last longer?
Yeah, I would say we talked a little bit about this in terms of sustainability, but if you're asking questions around growth, I think the truth of the matter is every company's trying to grow. I don't know that anybody's trying to pull back based on what they might see as an altruistic goal of putting less out there. I think people are making the assumption that they're going to compete and the consumer will choose, and by that means settle. And all they can do is control what they can control, and that is through the efforts that we've talked about around sustainability and the programs that Ellen had just mentioned as well. But I don't know of any companies that are holding back growth because of that and taking full responsibility, because if they don't, somebody else will. And we used to always say at prAna, we want to grow for the sake of goodness, not for the sake of just growing. And we called it quality growth. We figured that every piece that we would sell would be one less piece of a competitor that wasn't doing the things that we were doing to protect the environment, to do less harm on the environment.
Yeah, this is a tough one, Michael. This is a tough question, and I'm appreciating you asking this question. I think, at the end of the day, there are a couple of good examples. Patagonia has shown us one playbook that I think is important, and it's about building, this multi-life expectation into your product offering, right? The idea of when something wears out and starts to become end of life, that it can get regenerated and go through to its next natural repair into a second use, right? I think we have to get back to some of the basics of, what we learned in second and third grade, that you need to reduce and reuse before you recycle, right? And so the idea about having less things that are going to last longer and finding a way to repair them and to reuse them for a second life or a third life is actually one of the most critical steps to being able to accomplish what you're talking about. Now, those can be successful business models for companies that are thinking progressively. A repair doesn't have to be a free process, right? Adding a second life into a jacket to let it allow it to last 30, 40 years doesn't mean you only get to charge once for that product. but you have to help bring the consumer along that journey and help them start to realize that these kinds of value-added services are how we start to deal with the extractive nature of manufacturing and capitalism as it's been built. And those are pretty intrinsic to the world that we live in today. So I think there are seeds of examples that we can draw from, but we have to keep pushing that forward, and it's not core to how people think.
I think this is such a really, thank you for all of that. I think this is a really nice time to start to wrap us up a little bit, and I'm wondering if any of you have like anything that we didn't get to that you really want to share with this audience tonight.
If I could make another plug for Camber, but I don't mean it for Camber's sake. This room in this town is full of a lot of like people. We like the outdoors, but we also look a lot alike. We think a lot alike, and if the industry stays looking like us with our shared experiences, the industry is not going to move forward. We have a growing customer base, people of color, people that come from marginalized communities that are participating in the outdoors. Our country's changing, but the outdoor industry is yet to really fully embrace it and change. And if it's Camber and other organizations, there are plenty of organizations that are really working hard to provide access to people, but the industry is not keeping up. It takes a real concerted effort. This isn't about cutting a check and letting somebody else do the work. All of us, and I can speak for all of us straight white males, we're the ones that really have to get behind it and commit ourselves to it and do something about it. So that's the thing for this industry. Anybody starting a business, running a business, consulting other businesses, I would just ask that everybody can reach out to their founders, their leadership team to start creating greater diversity. I think the industry's done I don't want to give a scorecard, but a better job at gender equity, but it goes to a certain point. You get to a director level, decent gender equity. You get to the boardroom, no gender equity. And then think of other people of color. Think of the LGBTQ plus community. There are other marginalized communities that really aren't given the opportunity that I'll speak for myself as a very, very privileged white male that never had to deal with anything that a woman has to. I believe I'm a father of 2 daughters, working daughters. One of them happens to be gay. I lived through their experiences, and this industry really needs to commit to that. So I can go on and on. I'm obviously passionate about it. The industry really needs to change, and I hope that, I know that I'm very proud of the work that Camber's doing, and I hope that we can get others to take part in that.
Well, thanks, Russ. And the bottom, yeah. And what's really wild is the data shows it's what's best for the bottom line. So if none of the other stuff works, you can just stick them with that, right? Okay, yes.
Do you have something you want to add?
Just gonna say +1 to what Russ said. Let's end on that.
Camber's a phenomenal organization. I've benefited greatly from learning from them. So I have one last thing, and this is more of a Bend-specific comment. Bend is an incredible place that I think most of us call home, or at least the greater Central Oregon area. And for those of us who have been in the area or come back and forth from the area for a long period of time, it goes through pretty whipsawed economic cycles as good times happen and bad times happen. And there has been a huge insurgence of great talent that has come into this community in the last 3 years that is all now facing down conversations with their companies about whether or not they're going to be asked to move back to wherever they came from. And this whole return to office conversation is just starting, right? It may feel like it's heated up and it's at, peak enthusiasm right now, but it's just starting. And so whoever's running a company in town, whoever is building a startup in town, there's never been probably a better moment in time where you've had access to a greater talent pool that lives here locally than you do today. So take advantage of that. Don't let the moment pass you, because even January 4th, Nike called all of their employees back for 4 days a week, right? Think of all the people who are now struggling to figure out how they're going to live in Bend for the long haul. So this is a unique moment that we're either going to lose a whole bunch of people again from the Bend community that we've lost before, or you're going to figure out how to give them great jobs to stay here and make this life that they've all chosen to be sustainable. So
Thanks, John. Yeah, it's huge.